G'day Bifrosters. Today we're going to have a look at advection. What you see here is faked advection, but it'll do. Advection is basically moving something with a fluid, a liquid or a gas, to move something around. What I'm doing here is I'm using fields to fake advection by wind, which is a fluid. I'm going to show you how to do this because you can also use the same system to advect with actual volumes, with fluids. Let's get to it. I'm going to open up the file advect.start. And what this is going to give you guys is a starting point. It's just going to have a little think for a minute, or it's going to crash, I'm not sure. There we go. Well, let's get our Bifrost graph back. And what this is essentially just what I was showing you before, already set up for you and ready to go, so we don't have to make all of the strands. You can download it from the link in the description, and please feel free to pull it apart and see how I've done it, and if you can improve it, please tell me, because I'd like to know. What you will need, I'll just get these two out of the way, we don't need those. You will need this file, and this I will also provide a link to my compound directory in the description, and you can find that in there. You copy it into your Bifrost compounds directory, restart Maya, and you should be good to go. Okay, so what we have here is a bunch of strands with random heights. I'm just really quickly faking grass, and the wobbly wavy lines you can see are because of how the strands are placed on a deformed plane. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my lighting back to default, just because it's a bit easier to see everything there. This is why I'm not a lighting artist, this is why I'm an effects artist. And then I'm going to drop the number of strands down to 100. When I say drop the number of strands, what I'm actually doing is dropping the segments in the plane that they're built from. Just to give us a bit of a faster work. So right now if we play this, the strands just sit there being strands. They're strands on point normals, which is why they go in different directions depending on which way the surface is bending at the time. So let's get into building this advection setup. First thing we're going to need is a pass. So this is my strand object coming out. There it is. And I'm just going to put a pass here because I'm going to do several things off this and just split things off. I'm also using a terminal, so I can very quickly turn off this one. I can turn on this one. We can see things as we go. So first thing I'm going to do is points and normals. So I have a compound for that. And before I go ahead and do anything with the actual normals or the points of the strands, I'm going to build my fields. And to build my fields, I'd like a couple of things. I'd like the original flat plane object, because I'm going to use that to work out my field in. We can put that into the proxy, and we'll turn off diagnostic and turn on the proxy. That's the original flat plane. I'm going to use it as a display object for my fields. So let's go and build a field. Let's see how we can get that going and what that looks like. So I'm going to build a fractal field. Fractal turbulence field. There we go. It's not doing much right now. It's just sitting there permeating the universe. Watch my video on fields. I'd like to be able to see this. So first thing I need to do is check to see if it's a scalar field or a vector field. And you just hover over there. This one's a vector field. You can see it in the pop-up box here. Vector field, see? So I'm going to need a vector field scope. There it is. Let's plug that into there. And let's just plug this into the proxy. There's our turbulent curly vector field. You can see the vectors are going in all kinds of different directions. I can do things like show me some flow lines. You see they start to turn into curves. They're showing the vectors a bit more, and it gets quite a little bit heavier to look at. I can turn on, I believe I can turn on arrows in here. Draw arrowheads, there we go. That's now showing us the direction the vectors are all going. But because really I'm going to make this into a wind force, I really just want to see it as it applies to this plane. It won't be exact because obviously the The grass sits above the plane a little bit, but it's a closer idea. So all I have to do is take my plane object, plug that into probe geometry, and there you go. Now I'm getting the vectors on that plane. It's just showing me a slice through that vector field. So remember, if you've seen my fields video, you would have heard me say this before, but remember that fields are a force that permeates the universe. They're very Star Wars. They have a blue side and a red side, apparently. But this field will continue on into infinity, up and down, all throughout the Maya universe, until we run out of memory, which is why we have to sample it at certain points. So we have a field. Wonderful. Doesn't look terribly much like grass yet. Let's go ahead and we'll just pull that out of there. So we are just looking at the field. And what I'm trying to build first is the turbulence on the grass. So grass doesn't always move in the same direction. The wind doesn't always blow exactly in one direction very straight all the time. So this is going to become the turbulence for the grass. And the first thing I want to do is I want to change my frequencies. Get that right down to 1, so it's really quite simple. And that's because I'm going to use quite a bit of it. There we go. So these will become the patterns that flow through the grass. Then what I want to do is I want to actually start that changing and evolving. So let's grab a time node. Believe that all time nodes are reflections of a singular time node, which is quite zen at this era of the night. Take the frame and I'm going to multiply it, and then I'm going to multiply it down. Multiply it just so 0.4 for a start and see what we can do. And then because this wants a scalar field in here, I'm just going to put down a scalar field node. So if you haven't seen the fields video, or even the arrays video, I would recommend that you go away, or pause this, go away and watch them. I'll wait. There you go. That better? That help you understand a bit more? So all I'm going to pop down here is a scalar field. I'm going to plug this multiplied time or multiplied frame into it, and then just pop this into the time. See, immediately it changes. And now we can play that. I've got my cached playback on, so I'm seeing this in real time. If you need to set that up, first thing is you go to cached playback. I just use evaluation cache. Playback speed, very important. Play every frame max real time. So this will give you 24 or 25 frames per second, depending on what you've got your Maya set to. But it'll show you a good representation of the speed, like it would be in a final shot, like it would be in a film. So I can see straight away that with the cache playback on, that's too fast. That's way, way, way too fast. The patterns don't evolve that quickly, so I'd go for a quarter of that. That's a bit better. That's a little bit better. I might change my frequency here just a little bit. Let's go the other way. You can see how it's making the patterns bigger or smaller, because I don't want lots of little patterns all over the place. We've got our speed going quite nicely. That's looking all right for now. If we wanted it to be faster or slower, we could also change the magnitude here. You can see how it's suddenly a lot more intense. Well, that's not so much faster or slower, it's just bigger vectors which will produce faster or slower movement. But I'm quite happy with one. If you wanted to make it a little more complex, you could just up the number of frequencies. So now I've doubled it, you've got just a little bit of more complex movement, which I quite like, so we'll go with that. So at this point, we have our time and our fractal turbulence field set up. And our fractal turbulence field is just going to provide literally some turbulence. That's what it's for. But we need to get the wind going. So we need to decide which way the wind's going to blow. Is it going to move or change? And we need to set something up to do that. Remember, we're still looking at the field. All of our grass is still there, ready for us when we're ready to go and apply these fields to it. But right now we're just looking at the field and the behavior of the field how it's changing, how it's moving. Make it even slower so we don't get too crazies. So what I'd like to do is I would like to have the wind blowing in the negative Z direction. So to do that, I'm going to need, just like we did in the fields video, I'm going to need to advect this field. We'll just pop that in there. So now we've got one field set up here, we've got time nodes, we've got multipliers, we've got all that kind of thing going on. And we're going to advect that field with another field, which will have all of its own modifiers and things going on. So I'm just going to add a vector field straight down, just to get this started. And I'm going to make this a value of, did I say negative Z? I did, so negative 2. And I'm going to plug that into the velocity field. You just see it move just a touch. It's not going to do much else until I hook up the time node to it. So I'm just going to hook up the same slowed down frames as I had over here. So this, out of this multiply into the time step. Let's see what this does now. So now we've got some flow going on. We're moving in the negative Z direction, but we're still getting turbulence. We're still getting the, you can see the arrows. Okay, let me just make that a little bit longer so everybody can see that. Because a little bit, the vectors are just a bit longer now. So you can see the vectors changing direction because it's moving the turbulence through. It's advecting the turbulence, it's moving it along the negative Z. So when these arrows are pointing along the negative Z like this, it means that the turbulence and the velocity are adding together. When they're the other way, when they're pointing in the positive Z, it means that the turbulence is stronger than the velocity coming in. So that's good. We've got a nice bit of turbulence that's all flowing in the direction we want. And this is all very good. We're just looking at the field. It's pretty much come time to get it onto the strands. And that's not the most difficult thing in the world. So just for now, I'm going to turn my strands back on, turn my display off. And I need a couple of things here to get this to work. I need the point positions of the strands, but I also need the ratio. Update strands ratio. And what the strands ratio is it goes through every strand and it finds the bottom and assigns it a 0, and the top and assigns it a 1 and interpolates all the way up. It's known in Houdini as curve U, I think. And it is also in Maya as the U value along a curve, if you remember building curves. So we're going to use this to manipulate the stiffness of the strands, and the position is what we're going to change. So to do this, let's put this into an evaluate so that we can have some control over it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sample the field. Sample the field. Sampling the field wants a bunch of positions, so it knows where to sample the field. So we have our positions, we'll plug that in there. We've now sampled the field's positions. We're going to multiply that by our ratio, which will become our our stiffness across all the strands. And then we're finally going to set the positions back on our strands, which I believe are these ones. They are. So we're going to go. Actually, we know I make that mistake a lot. We're not going to set the positions. We're going to add this back onto the positions, and then we're going to set the positions. So set geoproperty. There it is. I didn't need set geoproperty. What an idiot. Grab this guy and we'll just go set popo, set point position. Everything goes black for a minute. And we plug this in. And now we have something. Just let that cache for a minute. And there we have our fields applied to our grass. Now you get the idea. So let's have a look at that stiffness. That comes in here. This represents the 0 point, so the root of the strand. This represents the 1 point, or the tip of the strand. So at the moment, the 0 point is very, very, very not going to move, which is great because you kind of don't want grass flying around in the air, like so. We'll do something about it disappearing into the ground as well in a minute. But we do want it to get fairly floppy fairly quickly. So we can do something like this. You can see them bend. There we go. It's a little bit better. So this controls the multiplying everything by the strand ratio controls essentially the stiffness of the strands. It also lets you shape them a bit too. So if I didn't want them to quite be so like hooked over, I could like make sure that they stay rooted a lot further down their length so that they go straight up and then hook over, or I can completely go the other way. And let's have a look at what this looks like. Bit weird, really. But you do get the picture. So this one's quite good as well. You can just have only the very, very root of it stay anchored and everything else just on a curve. Again, still a bit too curly. You can use preset curves if you like this one, and then do that to it, and maybe do that to it. But you get the idea. You can do have a lot of very quick changes in look, just really, really quickly by changing the curve, changing how stiff or how floppy our grass is. So let's do something about them like disappearing into the ground. That is quite simply, I should just be able to go absolute value. Yep, there we are. And it just makes sure that they're all positive. There's no negatives in there. And you can see how that's working now. That's a lot better. As the wind is blowing. And I can also, just so you know that you're able to do this with fields, I can control each different dimension of the field the same way I can a vector. So I can take this field and I can go vector 3 to scalar, because the fields just work like vectors. That's great. And I'm going to need its opposite number, scalar to vector 3, over there. And we're going to leave our Z exactly how it is, but we're going to multiply down our X, and we just need a scalar field here. Let's make this 0.2. And there, and I'm going to copy that, paste it, do the same for my Y. So X back into X, Y back into Y, and then the whole kit and caboodle back into sample field, like that. So this is essentially going to scale down by 1/4. Let's get this out of the way because we're just getting a little messy here. I'm going to scale down the X and the Y by 1/4, but leave the Z exactly how it is. And now it's looking a lot more like grass. It's only really bending in one direction. In the other two directions, it's bending a little bit, but not as much. So you're getting more of that feel of wind blowing things around. Okay, that's about all I've got for you. I can really, really quickly show you how to do this to a volume, but then I'd have to set up a volume. So I will do that as a bonus tutorial later on, when it's not so late in the evening. So let's run through what we did and then I'll let you go. So what we started with, and I'll just chuck down a quick terminal so we can see it. We started with this file that I pre-made for you, and the link to the file and all the compounds you'll need is going to be in the description. And we'll just turn this off for now. And sometimes you have to turn things off and on again to get them to work. There we go. So we started with just some randomly, they're not randomly scattered, they're scattered on the points of a grid, of a plane, but they do have random heights. And there's strands on the normals. So that's where we started. And what we did from there is we went ahead, oops, that's the wrong one to turn on. We went ahead and we constructed a field that we thought would, give us the best idea of how things might look as grass blowing in the wind. And we did a lot of work just with the field and our vector field scope, just to get all of that right, get everything moving nicely, get our vectors right, all of that kind of thing. So we started right back here. We started with our fractal turbulence field, and that gets us our evolution, our turbulence running through the wind. We plugged a time node into it. So we took the time node, we took the frames, multiplied it by a small number that controls our speed, converted it to a scalar field, put it into the fractal turbulence field as our time, tattooed with these a bit just to get the right size and things like that, just to get our turbulence feeling right. There's a few more things we could have done that we didn't. We changed the seed, but what we were really just looking for was behavior. So once we had that looking the way we wanted, we decided it needed some movement, plugged it into an advect field, and then grabbed ourselves a vector and plugged that in to get our movement of the entire thing in the -z direction. So this is providing our speed, and I will save this file and provide it at the link in the description. And then the last thing we needed to do to make the advect field work was plug the time node into it again, because this advects this field with this field at this time step, which means at this point in time, if we pop a watch point here, it's essentially moving at 14.24 units every time step, every frame. It must be every second. If I unplug that, what I've got is just the evolution. It's no longer it's advecting it once. It needs to advect it every single frame. Just undo that till it comes back. So now we've got our wind again. Now you can vary the wind strength by adding things onto here. So from there, we did, at this point we actually plugged it into the strands to see how it looked. And it wasn't looking too bad. It was close, but it wasn't exactly great straight away. So to make it look better, we came down here and we turned the field into an absolute field, so everything was positive. There's no negative at all. It's all pointing up. What I should have done, actually, to get this completely right, is only done that in the Y, because we still want negative movement from X and Z. So the Y comes out of there and it's going into there. So this is the correct way to do it, and this is the way that I'll leave it in the file. So now we still get negatives in our X and Z direction. You can see them bouncing back there. I think that's a positive Z right now. And then the negative Z will come in a minute. There we go. But our Y's are no longer going all the way under the ground. So that just guarantees us a positive value in the Y. And then we scaled down our X and Y by 25, by 0.2, sorry, by a fifth. So they're a fifth of what they would be. We can kill them entirely if we want to. So that there's no movement, there's only movement in the Z now. We can do that too. This gives us a surprising amount of control just playing with the things that we're multiplying into the fields. From there we were pretty much done. We sampled the field, we multiplied it by the strands ratio, and what the strands ratio gives us is essentially a stiffness. Multiplies them by 0 at the bottom and by 1 at the top. So of course when you multiply something by 0, it's 0. So we're not going to add anything here. We used that to multiply, we sampled our field at our point positions, which the point positions of the strands. So I believe that there's something like 16 points in these strands. I'll tell you in just a second. Strands along norms, 32. So there are 32 points in every strand. So we are sampling this field at every single one of these 32 points for all of these strands. I think if we wanted to, we could speed it up. There's a couple of ways we could optimize it, but I'm not going to go into that now. We then multiplied what came out of the field, where the field positions are sampled. We multiplied that by our strand ratio, which gives us our stiffness. And it's what anchors the bottom and lets the top flap around. And then we added all of that back to our point positions, set the point positions in our strands, and we went and had a look. And that's pretty much the story of how you advect strands with, in this case, fields. To do it with the fluid, you set up the arrow your way you want, you plug it into a voxel field, and then you use that. You get the velocity, you sample the voxel velocity from that field, and you just, same steps as here. I'll do a bonus one where it shows you how I'm doing that, but I won't do that now. I'll do that in maybe a couple of days. So I hope this has helped. Any questions, leave me a comment. Find me on the Slack channel, and yeah, have a good night. Thank you very much.